Hey guys, loud guys, today we are going to watch how strong is US military in 2024. So that's the question in everybody's mind because we see like how all the other powers like China, India are also getting strong. So how strong is US military in 2024? So let's watch this.
There are 195 recognized countries in the world doing their best to navigate the unforgiving arena of global geopolitics. However, only one country among them has been unrivaled as the world's supreme military power for years. The United States.
Yes.
And that's why it shouldn't be surprising that this military titan might be ranked as the #1 military power once again in 2024.
Ooh.
To be fair, quantifying military power is a tricky endeavor, as the numbers don't always tell the whole story. However, the US's dominance extends far beyond mere statistics, encompassing cutting-edge technological innovation, logistical prowess, and unparalleled operational capabilities that cement its status as the world's preeminent military force. So in this video, we will play the numbers game, but we'll also look at what those numbers represent. Regarding
There
the
should be
numbers, we'll
power in that
primarily
number.
consult Global Firepower's Military Strength Rankings, an annual report that comprehensively assesses military capabilities worldwide. For 2024, Global Firepower, or GFP for short, evaluated 145 countries across 60 individual factors to determine each nation's military strength. Some of these factors are troop numbers, military equipment, and financial stability. Again, accurately ranking military power involves more than just numbers. For instance, one country might possess a large tank fleet filled with outdated or poorly maintained vehicles,
Yes.
while another may have a smaller fleet composed of modern, well-maintained tanks.
Of course, the
equipped
modern
with
one is
advanced
better one.
technology. However, while the exact GFP ranking might be off for a few countries, the data is accurate primarily from official sources. So without further ado, let's dive into the state of the US military in 2024 to understand why this country commands the respect and the fear of nations around the globe. First, let's talk about money. After all,
Money.
no country can maintain military dominance without substantial financial investment. And when it comes to the US's annual defense spending budget, calling it a substantial financial investment might just be the understatement of the century.
Substantial
Why?
is
The defense
understatement.
budget the US Congress approved for 2024 is a staggering $886 billion, roughly
Around
3.3%
1 trillion.
of the country's gross domestic product, or GDP. Though this number is insanely impressive in and of itself, it becomes mind-blowing when you consider how much other nations are spending on defense.
1
The number
trillion.
2 nation, China, plans to spend $236.1
Oh my
billion
God,
on
4
defenses in
times
2024, a notable 7.2% leap from the previous year. This increase is even higher with the third-ranked nation, Russia, which intends to spend around $109 billion on national defense,
About 8 times
approximately
bigger than
30%
Russia.
more than in 2023. As monumental as the difference between the US's military budget and the ones from the second and third ranking countries, it's also important to note that the US probably won't see any significant increases in defense spending anytime
Why?
soon. You see, the increase in the US military budget was capped at 1% in 2023 thanks to a 2-year budget deal. But even after those 2 years pass, financial experts don't see significant changes in the US's military budget for at least 2 more years. Afterward, the experts estimate that the budget could gradually rise to $922 billion in 2035. But let's go back to the present for now.
no.
What is the US spending its military budget on?
Yes, where
This
is the
budget must cover
935
numerous
billion
aspects
going?
of a standing fighting force. 4 areas might be the
Aircraft
most
carriers.
crucial: operation and maintenance, research and development of weapons and equipment, procurement of weapons and systems,
Salaries.
and military personnel.
Yes.
Speaking of military personnel, number-wise, how strong is the US military in 2024? Let's start with the total available
Solid
military
muscle.
manpower. This figure refers to the total number of people a nation could mobilize in the event of a war, be it offensive or defensive in nature. Remember that this number can only be estimated and represents a rough picture of the potential force size, not an exact count. According to GFP estimates, the US could commit almost 150 million people to its war effort,
Wow.
roughly 44% of its total population.
Really?
Though this figure is undoubtedly impressive, it
I
isn't
don't
the
think
highest
so.
in the world. Of course, this shouldn't be surprising
India.
as the US isn't the most populous country in the world. That title belongs to India,
India.
closely
Yes.
followed by China, with each country having more than 1.4 billion people. With this discrepancy in population in mind, it's perfectly understandable that India and China rank better
We
in
have
terms
more
of
people
total
to fight.
manpower, both being able to commit over 650 million
650
people to
million.
their respective war efforts. A similar situation can be seen in the number of people fit for military service. As the name suggests, these are the able-bodied people who could theoretically fight or participate in material production during a long-running war campaign. The US roughly has 124 million troops, while India and China can offer 4 to 5 times more. But let's move away from potential scenarios.
Yeah, bigger.
How many active duty personnel does the US have in 2024? In other words, how many soldiers are currently engaged in full-time military work and could be ready to fight for the nation at any given moment? The answer is approximately 1.3 million highly trained individuals. Though this figure places the US in the top 3 countries in the world, it's important to note that the number of active duty personnel has been declining for quite some time.
Why?
That's why the current figures are far from the most recent peak of over 2 million active duty soldiers in 1987. But what about reserve personnel? Unfortunately, this isn't where the US shines in the 2024 military power ranking. But before delving into the details, let's explain the difference between active and reserve duty. Think of it this way.
Reserve is the one who's
Active duty is
waiting.
a full-time job,
Yeah, active is
while
a
reserve
full-time.
duty can be compared to a part-time job. Reservists are considered an optional military component and are basically on call for service at any given moment. The US has almost 800,000 of these reservists as part of its
Wow.
military force in 2024. The figure is nowhere near Vietnam's 5 million reservists, which
Oh,
occupies the number one
Vietnam.
position globally. It's also significantly lower than 3 other nations in the top 5 in the military power ranking of 2024. South Korea, with over 3 million
Where's
reservists,
India?
Russia with approximately 2 million, and India with
Oh.
roughly
I
1.15
just said there will be
million
more.
reserve duty personnel. The only other country in the top 5 with fewer reservists is China, which has 500,000. There are 2 ways to look at this number, one more positive and the other quite the opposite. On one hand, the relatively low number of reservists in the US could be attributed to the country's reliance on a well-established active duty force and sophisticated military technology. On the other hand, the number of US reservists could be related to how overused the military component is. As things currently stand, some reservists are expected to provide daily support to global military operations, essentially changing the very nature of this military element.
Yes.
This could have something to do with fewer people deciding to join the military as a reservist. But speaking of joining the military, which options do individuals have when considering enlistment in the US military? The United States Armed Forces collectively manages 3 major service branches: the US Army, the US Air Force, and the US Navy. In addition to the 3 main military branches, the US has 3 other notable military divisions: the US Marine Corps, the US Space Force, and the US Coast Guard.
Space
5
Force?
of these branches are managed by the Department of Defense. The US Coast Guard is the only exception, falling under the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security. But what exactly are these departments managing in 2024? Let's find out. First, let's get the numbers out of the way. Number 1 is the Army, the largest and oldest service in the US, with roughly 452,000 active duty soldiers. This is the smallest total the Army has been since 1940.
It is
a year
decreasing, so
before
that is
the
not
US
good for
joined
US.
World War II. In second place,
India and
we have
China
the
are
Navy,
increasing.
the US's
Increasing,
forward
yes.
deployed force. In 2024, this branch had approximately 347,000 active duty sailors. As with the Army, the US generally isn't satisfied with the number, as it falls short of desired readiness levels and strategic objectives. Third-ranking branch is the Air Force, closely following the Navy with approximately 324,000 active duty personnel. The Department of Defense describes the Air Force as having rapid, flexible, and lethal air and space capability.
That is the best.
Next up, the Marine Corps, a component of the Department of the Navy, which accounts for about 172,000 of the US's active duty personnel. This just leaves us with one more Department of Defense
Space
controlled
Force.
branch,
What does
the
this
US
do?
Space Force. Due to the unique nature of this branch, it shouldn't be surprising that it's by far the smallest, encompassing only about 9,400 active personnel. It also makes it the smallest branch in the US military in general, as the Department of Homeland Security managed Coast Guard has 41,700 active duty service members. However, the number of military personnel in each branch is just one aspect of their military might. The other, arguably even more important aspect, is the equipment and technology they possess.
Yes.
In this regard, we'll focus on 3 areas of attack.
I
Let's
think
look
this
at
is the
US
main
land,
part for
air
USA.
power, and naval power.
Technology.
We'll start with the US's might on the ground. Though it took some time, the US ground forces have finally started departing from the Cold War era thinking focused on containment. Slowly but surely, these forces are becoming significantly more agile and adaptable, reflecting the requirements of the modern battlefield. For this endeavor, the U.S. ground forces primarily rely on combat tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, and multiple launch rocket systems. So let's break down the U.S.'s capabilities in these departments. When it comes to tanks, the M1 Abrams continues to lead the way, making up for a good portion of the country's 4,657 tanks. This figure makes the U.S. the NATO country with the highest number of tanks. However, the same cannot be said for the world, as this position belongs to Russia, which has over 14,000 tanks.
They
While
just
Russia's
love tanks.
main battle tank, the T-72, is far inferior to the U.S.'s Abrams tanks. The same cannot be said for the T-14 Armada, which was designed to rival and even surpass its Western counterparts' capabilities. Regarding infantry fighting vehicles, the widely respected M2 Bradley remains a cornerstone of the U.S. ground forces, providing formidable firepower and mobility. However, we mustn't forget about the Stryker armored vehicles that have allowed the U.S. ground forces to cover a myriad of battlefield roles with as many as 10 variants of this Canadian-made vehicle. So it's no wonder that some 10% of all U.S. infantry fighting vehicles are Stryker armored vehicles. These include 1,789 M1126 infantry carrier vehicles or ICVs, 545 M1127 reconnaissance vehicles or RVs, 441 M1129 mortar carriers MCs, 348 M1130 commanders vehicles or CVs, 304 M1133 medical evacuation vehicles or MEVs.
So many different type of vehicles they have.
Some 360,000 frontline, second line, and support vehicles are mostly wheeled types designed for urban fighting based on experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq. This impressive figure also makes the U.S. the #1 country in the world in terms of infantry fighting vehicles, as they possess more than double these vehicles compared to the next countries on the list, China and Russia. Unfortunately, the U.S. artillery systems don't showcase the same superiority. Here we'll look at two artillery systems, self-propelled and towed. Both these systems have a pretty self-explanatory name. The former can move independently on tracks or wheels, while the latter requires a separate vehicle to position it on the battlefield. The U.S. operates an equal number of both these systems. It has almost 1,600 self-propelled guns, and almost all of them are M109 Paladin tracked vehicles. As for their towed counterparts, there are about 1,267 of them used by the U.S. military. Roughly 820 of those are the M777 howitzer class systems operated by the Army and Marine Corps. This just leaves us with multiple launch rocket systems. These systems aim to provide rapid and widespread firepower against ground targets, typically using rockets or missiles launched from a mobile platform. The U.S. ground forces operate almost 700 of these handy systems,
700
with the M142 HIMARS launcher making up more than a quarter of the total number.
There is how
they're
spending that $1 trillion.
How does the U.S. rank in terms of air power in 2024? The answer is simple. In the air, the U.S. is second to none.
The best.
With over 13,000 service-available airframes, the U.S. maintains the world's most formidable air force with a diverse fleet of aircraft. So let's inspect this fleet in more detail. The U.S. Air Force is one of the few services worldwide that operates a dedicated bomber fleet with aircraft capable of both conventional and nuclear attacks. The standout bomber aircraft in this fleet include the B-1B Lancer as the backbone of the U.S.'s long-range bomber force. The Air Force operates 39 of those high-level bombers, which can carry the highest payload of 75,000 pounds. The B-2 Spirit, it's a multi-role bomber capable of carrying both conventional and nuclear warheads. Due to a high per-unit cost, only 21 of these aircraft are in the U.S. fleet, but the amount of firepower these units bring more than makes up for their modest number. The B-52 Stratofortress is a long-range heavy bomber that can fly at high subsonic speeds at altitudes of up to 50,000 feet. The U.S. force has used these bombers since the 1950s and operates 72 units. Next up, the U.S. Air Force's fighter aircraft fleet. These aircraft remain the frontline defenders for the U.S. Air Force, which operates as many as 1,854. Let's list the most notable among them. The F-15
they are
Eagle
very
is an
costly.
all-weather, extremely maneuverable tactical fighter, represented by over 500 units. The F-16 Fighting Falcon is a compact multi-role fighter that's relatively low cost, That last factor explains why the Air Force operates 775 of these fighters, the most of any model. The F-22 Raptor is a supersonic all-weather stealth fighter that can perform both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. The Air Force has 177 of these premier aircraft. The F-35A Lightning II, the U.S. Air Force's latest fifth-generation fighter, accounts for 310 units. Though these aircraft might be the first you think of, the U.S. Air Force fleet doesn't solely consist of aircraft designed to engage in combat or intercept other aircraft. It also includes aircraft designed for various other crucial missions, such as refueling, transport, and reconnaissance. Here are some of the more notable aircraft fulfilling these roles. First up, tanker aircraft, designed to extend the operational range of other aircraft. The U.S. Air Force has over 2,600 of these valuable aircraft, including the following: 388 KC-135 Stratotanker aerial refueling tankers, 61 KC-46A Pegasus aerial refueling and strategic military transport aircraft, 40 KC-10 Extender advanced tanker and cargo aircraft. As for transport aircraft, the U.S. Air Force operates over 950 units of the most diverse design, with the C-17 Globemaster III as the primary hauler with 228 units. Interestingly, this fleet also includes limited numbers of special aircraft designed to transport VIP individuals, such as U.S. leaders and high-ranking government and Department of Defense officials.
They don't go in Air Force One?
There's only one C-20 and 4 C-32 aircraft. When it comes to reconnaissance, the following aircraft play a significant role: 13 MC-12W Liberty medium to low altitude twin-engine turboprop aircraft, 14 E-8C Joint Stars Joint Surveillance Target Attack Radar Systems, and 26 U-2S Dragon Lady subsonic high-altitude spy planes.
The shape of it!
Two more notable pieces of equipment to cover: helicopters and unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. The former category includes approximately 5,737 units, which are instrumental to the U.S. military due to their flexibility and tactical usefulness. These helicopters can be deployed to various missions, including search and rescue, medical evacuation, and special operations support. However, these rotorcraft units can also attack. The U.S. owns about 1,000 dedicated attack helicopters that can provide on-call fire support for ground forces, neutralize armored vehicles, or counter dug-in enemy force elements. Lastly, unmanned aerial vehicles. This is another area where the U.S. absolutely demolishes any competition. The country's armed services operates one of the largest UAV forces, with over 16,000 units. These drones are primarily intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance
India recently bought a few hundreds of them.
But direct attack units are also included. Now that we covered the U.S.'s land and air power, let's dive into and explore the strength of the U.S. naval forces in 2024. By now, you probably won't be surprised to learn that these forces also beat out potential competitors by a considerable margin. Sure, with 472 vessels, the U.S. might not have the largest fleet in terms of size. However, the U.S. Navy boasts unmatched technological sophistication and operational capabilities, ensuring dominance in both traditional and asymmetric maritime warfare scenarios. The U.S. Navy also dominates the number game in areas where it matters the most on the sea: carriers. The U.S. currently has 11 carrier ships,
Nobody can match
all
that.
the other countries in the world combined. To be fair, 10 of these are the Nimitz-class nuclear-powered carriers that still utilize Cold War technologies to some extent. Still, they remain formidable assets, complemented by the newer, more advanced Gerald R. Ford-class supercarrier, which promises to take the U.S. military's naval capabilities to new heights. The U.S. is also number one in the helicopter carrier department, with 9 impressive warships. Even though these warships are smaller and less expensive to procure, other notable military forces are yet to keep up. Japan has the most helicopter carriers after the U.S., with only 4. But let's turn up the dramatics and discuss the more aggressive vessels in the Navy's fleet. And what better way to start than with destroyers? Destroyers are advanced multi-role vessels equipped with various sensory equipment, processing systems, and weaponry to counter threats from the air, the surface, and under the surface. These ships can operate independently of the main fleet when hunting enemy targets, often completing their missions with unbelievable precision. With all these characteristics in mind, you probably won't be surprised to hear destroyers are rather costly to procure and operate. That's why only a dozen countries in the world own destroyers. most of them operating only a
One or
few
two.
of these powerful vessels. Now, of course, the same can't be said for the US, which owns as many
Huh.
as 75 destroyer-type ships,
75.
the most in the world. Among those destroyers, two classes are represented. The Arleigh Burke class
Arleigh
with
Burke
73
class.
destroyers, and the Zumwalt class with 2. Now, let's peek under the surface. There you'll find an impressive fleet of attack submarines, combining Cold War relics with more modern
Everything
and advanced
is too
entries.
much in America.
The first category is filled with vessels like the
Los Angeles
26
class.
Los Angeles
LA.
class, 18 Ohio class, and 3 Seawolf
Seawolf
class
class.
attack submarines. The second boasts 24 Virginia class submarines that are gradually replacing their older counterparts. Now, while we have to go underwater to view this display of naval might, it's important to know that these submarines can also conduct land attacks, some of them even through nuclear means. And don't get fooled by the name attack submarines, as these vessels can also be used for reconnaissance or to provide support during special forces operations. There are aspects of the naval fleet where the US isn't the leading military force in the world. In fact, the US doesn't even rank in the top 10 in
Oh,
some
what
of them.
is that?
But if you know anything about the country's determination, you know that this won't last for long. Take frigates, for example. Currently, the US has 0 of these multi-role general-purpose vessels, which places it at the bottom of the 145 countries ranked by global firepower. Though keep in mind that the US rarely uses frigates anymore. However, other powerful countries like Russia and China haven't followed suit. So the US is getting back into the frigate game. The construction started in August 2022 after a 35-year break. And the USS Constellation,
Just because
the lead
others are
class of
using
these
it, the US is
vessels,
also making
should
it.
enter service around 2026. Other areas where the US Navy currently falls short are, number 1, the Corvette-type vessels, which are very
Corvette-type.
similar to frigates. Currently, the Navy operates 23 of these small vessels, which is almost 4 times less than the first-ranking country, Russia. Number
Russia has
2,
more.
the mine and counter-mine warfare ships that lay down or neutralize minefields in strategic waters. As of 2024, the Navy owns 8 of these vessels, a far cry from the 47 owned by the same country that owns the most corvettes, Russia. Finally, there's
Russia
number 3,
has a good
the
ship-
Merchant
number
Marine
of
Force.
ships.
During wartime, these vessels transport soldiers, supplies, and vehicles. The U.S. owns around 1,800 merchant vessels, so it doesn't even manage to crack the top 10 leading maritime nations. Still, these very few items in no way detract from the extraordinary military might that the U.S. possesses. By now, you should understand why this nation has consistently been ranked number 1 regarding overall military power and capability. All of this boils down to one vital question: how will the U.S. use its military might in 2024? There's a whole barrage of ongoing military operations that either involve the U.S. directly or through international organizations like the United Nations, the UN, the European Union, EU, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO.
NATO.
Here's a quick overview of the operations involving the U.S. in chronological order. Since 2004, the U.S. has been deploying drone strikes against Islamist militant groups in the war in northwest Pakistan. Since 2010, the same destiny has befallen Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and ISIS positions in Yemen, resulting from the effort to combat the Al-Qaeda insurgency in the country. In 2011, U.S. troops were sent to Uganda as advisors to assist in
Wow,
the
they
fight
go to
against
so
the
many
Lord's
places.
Resistance Army, or the LRA,
fight
and its
terrorism.
leader, Joseph Kony. In 2014, the U.S. started interventions in Iraq and Syria, aiming to combat the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS.
ISIS.
In 2021, the U.S. continued its intervention in Somalia by conducting airstrikes on al-Shabaab militants. In 2023, Operation Prosperity Guardian was launched in order to counter the threat by Houthi forces in the Red
Yemen.
Sea. Besides conducting specific operations, the U.S. troops are always stationed
In India
across
also?
different
No, in
continents to
Pakistan.
maintain regional stability, provide security assistance to partner nations, conduct joint training exercises, or deter potential adversaries. So, as of 2024, the U.S. has over 100,000 service members in Europe, 30,000 throughout the Middle East, 375,000 in the Indo-Pacific region. From these numbers and the ongoing military operations, it's easy to conclude where the U.S. stands on most matters
Number
in terms
one.
of foreign policy. For instance, Europe received another 20,000 American soldiers after the Russo-Ukrainian War began in 2022 to enhance its military capabilities. Similarly, the sheer number of troops in the Indo-Pacific region makes it clear that the U.S. prioritizes the so-called free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which aims to uphold international norms and principles in the face of increasing assertiveness from countries like China.
This video has just proved that US is still the number one, and there is no point in even guessing it, because like there are some points which I was shocked in frigates, or in there are some like destroyers. There were US was a bit behind, but all the other parts US was way ahead of all the other countries even combined. So that's the most powerful I've seen USA become.
I think all the millions of dollars are worth, because you know whatever happens, we have like USA, we can contact them. Like I'm so grateful for that. It's like a backbone, you know. US is like a backbone. Whatever if happens, US is there, and that's why they are doing this, you know, to protect themselves and neighboring country.
So what do you guys think about it? Do let us know in the comment section below. So do like, share, and
Subscribe.
Bye.
Bye.